Thanks for tuning in to more football talk. The New England Patriots, to be precise. It's Pat's Probe on the Our Football Network. As the Patriots are coming off a loss to the New Orleans Saints, 28-13. Matt Jones throws 3 picks, 51 passes. There's a lot to talk about, not just with the offense, the defense, special teams, and that's right, it's Tom Brady week. So, of course, joining me once again is Evan Lazar, CLNSmedia.com. Evan, I don't know. It was almost like, I know we're going to dissect everything. The quick and easy way to analyze the game is, they were looking ahead. Tampa Bay was looking ahead, too. They were both looking ahead. See how bad both teams played? They were both looking ahead. All right, if that's the case, we'll see you next week. But it's a lot more... it's a lot more to go with than just they were looking ahead.
Yeah, I mean, my response to that is looking ahead to what? If you're Mac Jones, right? Do you really care about Tom Brady's return to Foxborough? No. If you're some of these new guys, Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, players that are new to the team this year or even last year as well, you can lump all those first and second year Patriots into that category. None of these guys care about Tom Brady coming back. It's just another game to all of these players for the most part. The players, maybe Bill Belichick has got an eye towards Tampa, and we can talk about Tampa here at the end. But overall, 99% of the people in that building could care less about Tom Brady returning. And Sunday night's game against the Bucs is just the next game on the schedule, right? It's just the next opponent on the schedule.
Yeah, and now, as we said yesterday, we kind of forewarned last week, the Patriots are going to have to do it at 1-2. And that means this is one of those game of the year situations because you just don't want to go down 1-3. Yes, you can make the playoffs at 1-3, but statistically, if they lose, I'm sure you'll be able to come up with all sorts of stats that tell us, what 1-3, how many 1-3 teams make the postseason. There's just not many, percentage wise. So it's a huge game, but the game itself that we first want to talk about, the Saint game, the thing that stuck out to me was that the game was clearly won at the line of scrimmage. It was won by the Saints in basically both facets. And once again, no Trent Brown. It is a major issue with him not in the lineup. Herron, matter of fact, since we're going to lead off with that, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at our laptop here and pop up New England's offensive line play for week 3 that included 2 sacks, 3 quarterback hurries, 3 quarterback hits, 13 quarterback hurries, and 18 total pressures. That is not going to win football games.
It's a high number, and I have the number one question I have received on social media since this game on Sunday is, where are the issues, right? Is this just a right tackle problem? Is it a problem across the line? Is it a problem with Mac Jones? Is it a problem with the way the protections are being set? Is it physical? Is it mental? And the answer to all those questions is all the above, right? It's really, when we break all these things down, and it's not just a couple of plays that we're discussing, but we're talking about 18 dropbacks where Mac Jones is under pressure. It's everything, right? It's all of the above. Now, the biggest issue that I see right now is something that the offensive line coach, Carmen Bricello, the Patriots, just said to me in his media availability. The Patriots have a sign in their meeting room, in the offensive line room, that says something along the lines of see the game through the same eyes, right? They want all 5 guys on the offensive line to see the protection the same exact way every single time. And right now it feels like discombobulated, right? It feels like one guy's expecting one thing, another guy's expecting another thing. This guy's not ready to pass off this blitzer, and that guy's not ready to pick up that stunt, and all these little moving parts. It's not one cohesive 5-man unit right now. It's 5 individual guys trying to get people blocked. And when you're doing it that way, it leads to a whole lot of just mental communication breakdowns, getting kind of caught off guard, right, by certain looks and certain pressures where you're expecting to block this guy right in front of you, and it ends up being this guy that comes into your area, and you're trying to look here or there, and no one's on the same page. The other thing that I would put in this category of protections, and this is something that I've been wary of talking about, because whenever people hear me or see me write that Mac Jones is partially to blame for some of the things going on, the storyline immediately blames it all on Mac, right? And that's just not fair for a rookie quarterback. But at the same time, his maneuvering in the pocket needs to improve if he's going to win at this level as a stationary quarterback. If he was Lamar Jackson or Russell Wilson or Patrick Mahomes, and he could move around and scramble out of some of these pressures and elude pressures with his legs, then that would be one thing. But since he's not that style, and since he is a traditional pocket passing quarterback, he, like Tom Brady did throughout his career, has to become a Jedi master in the pocket, right? He has to understand where his protection is going to be, where the strengths of that protection is, where his free space is in the pocket, how to maximize his airspace in the pocket and moving around. And I think another really important thing that they'll talk about with Mac this week is how deep he's setting in the pocket, right? And dropping in the pocket, and not dropping 10, 11 yards back and then trying to throw or hitch back up, but actually allowing those tackles to run those guys by you and just step up in the pocket, and those interior guys keep him clean. And that's how he's able to protect himself. Right now, we're seeing him just not have that sixth sense quite yet of how to maneuver the pocket at a high level, and that will come in time. And no rookie quarterback comes into the NFL with a great sense of how to maneuver the pocket. That's a something that comes. I always compare college as, undergrad football. That's graduate level stuff, right? That's PhD in football and in quarterbacking. So that will come in time. But when you have an offensive line that's struggling individually to block people, and then you exacerbate that issue with the rookie quarterback who's running into some sacks, it causes a whole lot of problems, which is what the Patriots are having. Now, the good news is, and this is what I wrote about in my film review today, is that this is not a receiver separation issue, right? Last year, I think for a lot of the season, they had protection. When Cam was tied together and he was playing well, the quarterback wasn't a major issue, but they didn't have the weapons, right? They're throwing at Damiere Byrd and Jacoby Myers and Devin Asiasi. This year, and on this tape against New Orleans, there are open receivers all over the field. Right? I mean, there are open receivers all over the field, and I broke down 10 different plays, a couple of the ones that they succeeded on and actually hit, and then 6 or 7 where there were open guys. Mac was getting to that, and he was going to throw the football there. He was looking there, and his eyes were in the right place, but the protection, for whatever reason, just broke down and didn't allow him to get the ball off properly. So the good news is that the receivers are getting open, and guys like Jonnu Smith had a terrible game, right? He had a couple of drops. He drops an open pass that leads to a pick six. A terrible game. But in order for Mac Jones to target him in those situations, he had to get open in the first place, right? And he got open in all those plays. He just didn't catch the football. So I have faith that Jonnu Smith will bounce back and he'll start catching the ball. But Hunter Henry, Nelson Aguilar, Jacoby Myers, obviously Kendrick Bourne, Jonnu, those 5 guys were creating opportunities for the Patriots to throw the ball down the field to them. They just couldn't hold on to it and protect it long enough to be able to take those shots down the field.
Yeah, because for Jones, he had his highest average depth target of his career, which was 11.7, dramatically higher than his first couple of weeks. So that's a good sign, and we talked about that last week.
Yeah, it's a good sign, and that was what I wrote today was the optimistic view, right? Because after the game on Sunday, we all killed them, right? We killed them on our post-game show. I killed them in my 10 things recap of the game, and everybody is flamethrowers are out,
Yeah.
right? That this team is not as good as we all expected. The team is not performing up to its talent level with the new additions and all this kind of stuff. Then you take a step back, you allow yourself to calm down a little bit from the game and from the feeling of losing by 2 touchdowns on your home field, and you revisit some of the plays and some of the opportunities that they had. And at least the Patriots can hang their hats on 2 things in my mind. One, the receivers were open, right? This wasn't a situation where everybody was covered. And the second thing is Mac Jones, I think his thought process and his eyes are in the right place. The reads are clean. He just has a lot of work to do with his offensive line, both them protecting him and also him being able to protect himself.
And look, the Patriots cannot, we know that there is no way that this team with this type of quarterback can have success if 2 things are happening. One, first of all, Trent Brown is out. And you just can't. You cannot. This is a team that must have success with the offensive line. Their offensive line must trot out there every week as one of the best in the NFL. It's the only chance that they have.
On paper, right? I mean, they're performing way below talent level. Trent Brown aside at right tackle, Shaq Mason, David Andrews, Mike Onwenu, and Isaiah Wynn, the other 4 guys in that offensive line, are good football players. Like, those guys are good NFL offensive linemen, and right now they are not playing up to that standard. So whether that's coaching, whether that's Mac, whether that's the way that they're calling these games from McDaniels' perspective, whether it's all of the above, that line is underperforming big time right now. A unit that a lot of experts and a lot of people I really trust with O-line play thought was going to be a top 5 elite offensive line in the NFL this year is playing not like a bottom 5 necessarily, but middle of the pack, 15 to 20 right now is where PFF kind of has them in their grading, right? Is in that 15 to 20
and
range.
That's not good enough.
The Patriots need them to be top 5.
And then because of the offensive line, it's not just Mac Jones. In order for Mac Jones to become successful, the offensive line has to help the team run the football better. This is a run-first offense, and they got nothing. When Mac Jones is leading the team in rushing, you're going to lose every time. So that I don't even. And what Damian Harris? Now, what did he have? He had only 6 carries. Now I know they were behind, but it was 7-0. Middle of the second, maybe. I mean, that's not a 21-0 hole. I mean, did they just not run enough to Harris? What happened there that they just basically played like they were 3 touchdowns, behind the whole game?
So I think it was twofold. One, I discussed this a lot going into the game with the Saints, that from a game plan perspective, the Saints have had a top 5 rushing defense in the last 3 seasons and are trending towards another really good year in run defense. So this is not a unit in New Orleans that gives up a ton of yards on the ground. It's a tough team to run on. So from a game plan perspective, I expected the Patriots to come out and throw the ball a lot because I knew that was really going to be the weaknesses in the Saints team. And the week before that, granted, it was with a lot of guys out due to injuries and things like that for the Saints, but Sam Darnold and the Panthers threw for over 300 yards in that game against New Orleans. So I expected them to throw. Now, I didn't expect Mac Jones to average 12 yards per attempt in the air, right? I expected it to be more of the dink and dunk Brady type of, quick passing offense, right?
That's right.
Get the ball out of his hands.
That's another thing I wanted to ask you about. Where's the quick reads? Where did that go?
Yeah, so some of that, I think you have to put on the fact that a rookie quarterback is just not going to see it and pull the trigger as fast as Brady or a lot of these other veteran QBs that are masters at that type of thing. But ultimately, I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact that they are trying to get some of these guys up the field, that some of the players that they signed in free agency that they're trying to integrate into the offense, Nelson Aguilar, for example, Johnny Smith, I think is more when he's not being schemed open underneath the defense to carry the football. They clearly want to try to get him up the seams, corner routes, vertical up the field, and use his explosiveness as a pass catcher to create some big plays. So you see them trying to take shots down the field, right? That's really what a lot of their concepts that they ran on Sunday were plays meant to push the football down the field. Now, I thought late in the game, those air yard numbers really spiked because Mac Jones was just trying to get it all back in one play, right? You're down 21-3, and he's just sitting there trying to hit Nelson Aguilar deep after attempt after attempt. He goes 1 for 11 on throws of 20 plus yards for 11. And at some point in time, look, last week it was all about Mac being gun shy and not taking shots down the field. This week he's taken too many, so it's totally inconsistent on our part, right? Yeah. Totally inconsistent. But I think the people that are right-minded people can recognize that there's a middle ground, right? That there's a middle ground that exists between the quarterback that we saw in week 2, who was afraid to, in many instances, to take the shots down the field, and the quarterback in week 3 that was a little bit too much gunslinger. He's got to find that happy medium.
Okay, so do you believe, talking about those 2 tight ends, because we did expect, all right, they're here for a reason, and it's going to be, you're going to find all sorts of creative ways to get these guys implemented into this offense. Well, we haven't seen any of that. So once again, is that just because we could just sit here, sooner or later this season, we're going to say enough of the rookie quarterback stuff. But it's still early enough where if somebody wants to say, well, as rookie quarterback, I'm willing to go, okay, that's part of the problem. I get it. But how much is that part of the problem early on, and how much is that Josh McDaniels? Because, I mean, I'm ripping Mike LaFleur to death as a Jet fan, because I'm like, look, I know the kid's a rookie, but sooner or later, your coordinator has to do something to help the rookie quarterback out.
Yeah, I would say that McDaniels has to shoulder a lot of the blame. And the one thing that really stands out to me is, like what you just kind of said, the lack of manipulating matchups, right? Finding favorable matchups. They have these 2 tight ends. Their 12 personnel package with Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry on the field together has been awful. The stats are terrible, and they have not gotten that unit off the ground whatsoever. They've actually been better in 3 wide receiver sets with only 1 tight end on the field, right? So their 11 personnel has been far more productive passing the football right now than 12. So that was the design. And you're not going to pay Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith $11+ million a piece and have only one of them playing at a time. So obviously they need to figure that out. Now, the good thing I would say out of what I saw from McDaniels on Sunday is that he's getting a pretty good feel, I would say, about how to use the wide receivers on his roster. Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, and Jacoby Myers seem to now be in the right spots, right?
Okay,
they're all running, they're all aligning and running routes from the right areas and attacking the right weaknesses in the defense and doing the right things with those players, with Myers and Bourne as the short intermediate guys, with Aguilar as the deep threat. It's that piece of the puzzle seems to be coming together. But Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, and in McDaniels' defense, Jonnu had a terrible game, and there were plenty of opportunities in this game for them to get Jonnu the football, and he just didn't hold up his end of the bargain, right? I mean, the pick 6, he's open on the play. It's not the best throw in the world. It could have been a little bit better, but it did make him reach out for it. But obviously a pass that is very catchable, and maybe if Mac hits him in stride there, he does have an opportunity a little bit to run with it after the catch, because he did have a step or 2 on Malcolm Jenkins. They tried to hit him on a corner route. He was open, but there was immediate pressure, and Mac had to scramble, and he was flushed out of the pocket. He then tried to hit him up the seam again, and again, another situation where pressure affected the throw. So there are 3 or 4 plays that Jonnu was right in the middle of that normally you expect Jonnu to make, right? Plays that you expect Jonnu to hit on. Now, does that mean he would have had 100 yards? No, it doesn't. But at least he would have had some of those plays that would be positive and productive plays. The other area of the field, though, that they're getting just nothing out of their red zone offense right now. They have the worst red zone offense in the NFL, 32nd, dead last in terms of red zone touchdown frequency. And when you have Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, there's no excuse for their red zone offense not to be good, right? You have 2 tight ends that are mismatches down there inside the 20. Use them And right now they're not using them. And I think from Hunter Henry's perspective, he's just got to be like, look, just get me isolated on a DB and let me make a play. Like
Sure.
whether it's in the slot or it's detached out wide, and I'm one-on-one with the guy, and Mac has to throw back shoulder or high point fade or inside route where I break inside and he hits me on the money, as I break out of, come out of the break, or use my body to shield the defender from the catch, all that kind of stuff, all those contested type of throws. Now, maybe that will come in more in time once Hunter Henry and Mac have a better chemistry and feel for one another.
That's the
But
hope.
it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of opportunities there. And then Johnny Smith is supposed to be this versatile Swiss Army knife. The Titans are handing him the football. They're throwing screens to him. They're running them on end arounds and jet sweeps and running him routes out of the backfield and tossing the football to him and doing all these other different things to manipulate the defense down by the goal line and use his versatility. And we have seen basically none of that from Josh McDaniels. So where those two are being utilized in the red zone right now is a mystery. It's something that needs to change immediately. Now, the other thing that will need to change immediately, and some of this might also fall on the quarterback checking into these running plays, but
Sure.
they are just getting down inside the 20 and running the football so much. I mean, way too much, especially on first and second down. They're not gaining any yards doing it. Then they're getting into third down, and then it's a money down, and you have to convert or kick a field goal, and, the whole dance. So Mac owned some of those. He said that he checked into a couple of runs with Brandon Bolden, who I think carried the ball for 3 times for -1 yards in this game. And it's just head scratching. Their red zone play calling, their usage of the personnel in the red zone. So hopefully it's starting to come together. It feels like it is between the 20s, and those 3 wide receivers are giving them something. So hopefully it starts to come along a little bit more. But the red zone play calling has been abysmal.
Speaking of Bolden being in the game, that's because James White was injured, and that could be a significant injury as well. So, have you heard anything at all about whether or not James White might miss time?
So he's going to miss time. The question is he going to need surgery for the injury or not? So he had a hip subflexion, which is not the Tua injury, right? The Tua injury is a dislocation of the hip. So that means that the hip popped all the way out and most likely broke something, right?
Okay.
With James White, his hip almost popped out of the socket, but not completely.
Okay.
So he avoided the dreaded Tua injury, which is one of the worst injuries that you can have in the sport. And Tua's a young guy and has been able to somewhat bounce back from it, but I wouldn't say he's even the player he was before that injury, just in terms of the velocity that he can put on the ball. And James White being a veteran running back, if he has a dislocation, that could be career over, right? So he avoided that, which is good news for the Patriots. He's going to go on injured reserve, but I don't think if he doesn't need surgery, is not necessarily season ending, and it's definitely not a career threatening injury at this point because he avoided that dislocation.
Okay. And that means we see Stevenson?
Your guess is as good as mine on that one. Honestly, I thought when he went out with the injury that we'd see more J.J. Taylor, who was active for the game. Instead, they went to Brandon Bolden, who is a veteran running back. He's played that role before in spurts. Not the answer, right? And he looked like a guy, especially on the handoffs when they did run the football to him, that hadn't played running back in a couple of years, right? His reads and he
looked awfully slow.
Yeah, just all over the place. And a couple of those runs, you go back and watch, there was a 3rd and 1 run right before halftime. And I'm not going to sit here and say that there was a giant hole for Brandon Bolden to go through. But if he just gets downhill and runs it right behind Shaq Mason and Mike Onwenu, who was pulling around, there might be a yard there, right? There might be a yard there to move the chains. And I think if a guy like Damian Harris is carrying the football in that situation, he just puts his head down and goes right on, underneath his right guard, who's a great run blocker, and just follows him to the first down. Instead, Brandon Bolden dances. He kind of tries to cut outside, and he gets tackled for a loss. So the Bolden runs need to be shot to the moon, right? We cannot see those anymore. And if he's in the game, as a receiver and as a guy in blitz pickup, I guess fine. But other than that, Brandon Bolden should not be on the field.
Yeah, that is not a good. Not only is it not just good to have him out there for his talent overall, but it's just not a good sign.
Yeah.
For Taylor or Stevenson, that the Patriots still believe that they have to understand, okay, well, everybody knows Taylor Stevenson, younger, fresher legs, more talented, skill players. They're that bad to be trusted that you have to have Brandon Bolden in the game at this in a situation where you're behind too. See, if you're leading, put the veteran in there. You don't want them to make any mistakes. What do you have to lose? You're behind. Get the kids in there. Let's see what they can do.
Yeah, I think Ramondre Stevenson's turn is coming here soon. The Patriots running backs coach Ivan Fears said that he anticipates Stevenson to bounce back from the week 1 performance and get back in there and be a good player for them. But now that, look, James White's going to be out for a period of time.
Hey.
Sony Michel is a Ram, right? They trade Sony Michel. They have no choice at this point but to trust Ramondre Stevenson again and see if he can bounce back from that game. And it's tough too because the fumble that he had in week 1, it was a borderline fumble, right? I mean, the play got reviewed. True. And it was very, very close. And just because he technically lost the fumble, and as Ivan Fears would say, didn't hand the ball back to the ref after the play, he's on the bench, a healthy scratch for 2 consecutive weeks. So at some point, the Patriots, especially in an offense that just needs guys to create plays, right? Just needs guys that are making big plays for their offense. Ramondre Stevenson did that in the preseason, and he did that at Oklahoma, and they're going to have to let him roll at some point.
Yeah. And maybe this is the perfect opportunity to have him come in. Even though it's a Sunday night game and it's the biggest game, the ratings are going to go through the roof. The fact is, it's been a couple of games and it's time to get in there. Yeah. And this is his opportunity to see if he could, which I believe too. It's unfair sometimes because you expect these young kids to be perfect.
Right.
And the veterans aren't perfect, but the veterans get the buys. Oh, that's okay. All right. You threw an interception. You had a fumble. That's okay. You've been around the league.
Damien Harris fumbled away the game.
That's right.
In week 1. And he's still out there, right?
So
yeah.
Now they only gave up 13 completions to Winston, 128 passing yards. So really, when you just look at the game itself, like if you were to look at the score and know that Jones threw 3 interceptions and a pick 6, you might think, oh, this was a complete whitewash. But when you watch the game, that's just not the case. It's a play here, it's a play there, and this is a really close football game because the Saints really only had maybe 2 drives the entire game that were just good offensive drives. Otherwise, they didn't do anything either on offense. And it's just one of those games where the veteran quarterback didn't make the mistakes, rookie quarterback, and not having, a couple other players come through. Again, it wasn't just a rookie quarterback thing. It was almost like one team let the other team beat themselves, which is really what it was. It wasn't like the Saints took the game away from the Patriots.
Oh yeah, and that's so un-Patriot and un-Belichick-like, right? Belichick has won as many games as he has with the Patriots over the last 20 years by doing the total opposite, right? Being the Saints. The Patriots, and they won one against the Jets the week before in that exact way, right? And I just can't tell you how many times I've seen the Patriots be the Saints, right? In this situation, in this game, and just be the team that doesn't turn the ball over, doesn't shoot themselves in the foot, and goes winning away because they have 0 turnovers and the other team has 4, just like against the Jets. Yep. And that's the formula for Bill Belichick. With all the Tom Brady stuff aside, the formula for the Patriots over the last 20, 25 years was to be the more fundamentally sound team, right? To be the team that takes care of the football, to be the teams that plays ahead of the chains, that does it, all 3 phases working together. And just over the last 2.5 years, really dating back to that end of the 2019 season, we haven't seen that Patriot team. We just haven't. We haven't seen that Patriot team, and that's, I think, something that makes it even more frustrating for a lot of Patriots fans. Is it's just not the product on any level that they're used to seeing, not even just the quarterback play, but just in all three phases of the game. And if you look at the defense, it's hard to get on the defense for this game because they played pretty darn well, right? They really did. And what really burned them, that first touchdown drive, they had two coverage busts in the secondary, one of them on the Kamara TD where nobody covered him out of the backfield. And that drive hurt them. But then after that, they shored all that kind of stuff up and they fixed all those types of things, and they really locked down from a mental standpoint from that point on, and they were able to hang with New Orleans' offense extremely well. Now, what plagued them was Jameis Winston came into this game as one of the worst quarterbacks in the league against the blitz. The Patriots blitzed him 7 times, and he went 6 for 7. He tore them apart against the blitz.
Okay, that's not good.
And so early on in the game, they were sending him, especially on third downs, they were setting blitzes at Jameis, and Jameis was just beating them on the blitzes through the air. So 3rd and 7, 8:30 left in the game. Mac Jones just drives the Patriots offense down the field for the first time for a touchdown. It's 21-13. The Patriots are back in the football game. 3rd and 7. What do the Patriots do? They rush 4. They drop 7 because Winston's been beating them with the blitz all game. He has all day there to stand in the pocket and look around to throw the football. And Jalen Mills gets beat on a route by Deontay Harris, and they move the chains and warm up the buses, right? The rest is history. So I actually asked Bill Belichick about it on Monday morning, and I said, in that situation, 3rd in the game against a quarterback that doesn't handle the blitz well, what are you doing only rushing 4? And he mentioned that, well, earlier on in the game, we tried blitzing Jameis and he was ready for it. They ran some max protections. They sprinkled in a couple of different things with their tight ends and their backs to make the protections easier for the offensive line, and they were able to beat the blitz. So the Patriots went conservative on that 3rd down. Jameis converts, and then they run the ball down the field the rest of the way, and it's 28-13, game over. So if you look at this defense, in week 1 and in week 3, they were not the biggest problem by any stretch of the imagination. They were the strength of both of those losses so far. But in both of those losses, there were 4th quarter drives where the defense had a chance to give the ball back to the offense to try to get the game won, and the defense didn't get the stop.
That's right.
Right? This week it was an 8-point game, and they had it with about 9 minutes to go, plenty of time for Mac Jones to orchestrate a comeback, and the defense never gave the ball back to the offense, right? And the same thing happened against Miami. They had Miami after the Damian Harris fumble. They had Miami backed up inside the 10-yard line, and they allowed them to go off their own goal line and get out of the end zone and kneel the ball down and end the game the football.
That's the true definition of whether you have a really good defense or not.
Right. So this defense is good, but it's not great. No. And the Patriots, for the way that their offense is playing right now, specifically or especially, need the defense to be great. They need the defense to be elite. And if you're going to have the football go right down your throat in a 21-13 game in the 4th quarter, that's not an elite defense. No. So that, as much as you don't want to get on the defense because they are far better in the first 3 games of the season than the offense, it's still not all the way there, right? It's good, not great. And the one sort of shining light about the defense, I would say, are that their side of the football, the newcomers, Matt Judon, Jalen Mills, those guys are fitting a lot better than the offensive pieces are in the early going, right? Judon looks like a monster. Yes. He had 3 sacks against New Orleans, and he looks like a really, really good player for the Patriots and just like a perfect system fit in what Belichick wants them to do. Jalen Mills isn't perfect. He gave up the 3rd down play that I just referenced, but that was the only catch he allowed the entire game. So a pretty solid performance in the first 3 weeks of the year for him as well. He has had some bad situational moments, but on the whole, not getting burned deep, not giving up the big play, and allowing the Patriots to stay in it. So Jalen Mills has looked solid. Matt Judon's looked fantastic. So those 2 newcomers are at least better than what the offensive weapons are giving them. And then, of course, week 7, Stephon Gilmore could be back
Yeah.
in this defense. And if you have a good defense that adds a former defensive player of the year, maybe that's what pushes them over the edge from being a good defense to being a great defense by the end of the year.
And then obviously way before that, including as we kind of segue into the Sunday night game is will Trent Brown be available? Of course, he'll be available a lot earlier than Gilmore. And does that include him returning on Sunday night?
So what I've been told is that Trent Brown almost was ready to go last week against New Orleans, just couldn't ramp it up enough to play in that game on Sunday. So it's trending towards a positive development for Trent Brown playing on Sunday night. Now, the concern that you have with it, though, is that it's a calf injury. He's 360 pounds.
Yeah, that's true.
It can come and go at any time. It can really, he could get in there and he could play 3-4 series in a row and then it pops again. Right. And then there he goes. So to some degree, the Patriots desperately need Trent Brown to come back, but they almost can't even rely on Trent Brown to be healthy for the entire year. He had injury issues last year with the Raiders as well and missed about half the season with injuries. So look, I hope he comes back and he's healthy for the rest of the season and we don't talk about this ever again. But the truth be told, it feels like a guy that you're getting a little bit weary of just trusting that he's going to be out there every single week and every single down.
This injury, and we've talked about it before, the importance of the offensive line, of why the Patriots haven't done enough in the last couple of drafts. Like even Onwenu, he wasn't a high draft pick.
No, it was a 6th round pick. Yeah.
So
the one saving grace that they might have is if Trent Brown goes out again with this injury or another injury and it just isn't coming together for him this second time around with the Patriots, the card that Belichick has in his back pocket that he's been reluctant to play is moving Mike Onwenu back to right tackle and putting Ted Karras in the starting lineup at guard. Ted Karras has started the last 2 years in Miami and New England at center and is a solid backup offensive lineman that's probably better than Justin Herron and Yasir Durant and the guys that they're throwing at right tackle. But this injury to Trent Brown was a week-to-week situation. And they don't want to shake up the entire offensive line for him to come back in week 4 or week 5. Now, if he all of a sudden is out for the year, my guess is that they play that card and they move Onwenu back outside, and maybe that ends up solving a lot of these problems.
Yeah, because that is definitely going to be one of the big offseason. I mean, with all the money, too, that the team spent in the offseason to not have a viable number 2 option, even just in short spurts, kind of surprising. Okay, now, as far as the game, I was looking at these trends. Now, these trends I want to start off with are pretty crazy. And they're so big that you could probably cancel them both out. Tampa Bay has covered 14 straight games as a favorite of less than 11 points after they have lost a non-division game as a favorite. So, again, a weird kind of trend, but a 14 straight trend. So you go, okay, well, that doesn't sound good for the Patriots. Well, the Patriots have covered 10 straight games when they're dogs of less than 7 after losing a game by double digits. Also, the Patriots are 15-2 against the spread in their last 17 after they play a non-division opponent off a straight-up loss of more than 4 points. But on the bad side, they've dropped 10 straight at home off a double-digit straight-up loss versus an opponent off a double-digit straight-up loss. So it's one of those games trend-wise where you go, well, it's just XX and XX, throw the trends out. Now, especially, I've said that also with the Patriots ever since Brady left almost. I can't really rely, and the Bucs too, I can't really rely on the long-term team trends for Tampa Bay and New England because Tom Brady's gone from one of the teams to the other.
Right. Exactly. I mean, all those, like, there's so many stats, and Sean Payton threw out one last week about the Patriots, and it ended up playing out in this game, just out of coincidence, about the Patriots when they win the turnover margin at home, they're basically undefeated in the Belichick era, right? If you win the turnover margin at Gillette Stadium, you win the game, is what Sean Payton was basically saying. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's probably accurate for the most part, but it also probably helped that they had number 12 in all those games for the last 20 years and not Mac Jones or Cam Newton. So all those trends, I throw them out the door. I think the biggest thing that you look at with this game is, first of all, there is a chance with the way that the Patriots are playing right now that this is not even a game, right?
Especially
I mean,
after a loss for Tom Brady last week.
Yeah, so Matthew Slater and Devin McCourty both echoed the same sentiment, which I thought was really hitting the nail on the head, which is just right now the Patriots are not good enough to worry about headlines, right? They're not good enough to worry about the return and Brady versus Belichick and all these. They have so much to worry about internally with what they're going on, how to get this team off on the right foot and how to turn this thing around, that Brady being the opponent is just another opponent, honestly, to these guys, because they're more focused, I would say, in a lot of ways with correcting their own mistakes than necessarily worrying even about what the Bucs and Brady are doing and game planning for Tampa Bay. Because if they don't play a cleaner game doing their stuff, it's not going to matter.
Yeah,
right. It's not going to matter what game plan Bill Belichick draws up to face Tom Brady if they're turning the ball over 3 times and they can't protect Mac Jones and they're giving up drives when they need to get stops, and it's not going to matter. Now, the fascinating X's and O's matchup of this is that I do think the Patriots defense is good enough for Belichick to do some things against Tom Brady, and maybe, I don't know about I don't know about confusing Brady, but I would say that they're good enough defensively to execute a game plan, right? So if Bill has a game plan up his sleeve that he's been working on for the last 20 years of, if I ever had to face Brady in a game, this is what I would do. I think they have the horses on the defensive side of the ball to install a legitimate Brady Super Bowl type of game plan. Like, we're going to do something totally outside the box to throw at Tom and get him, and stop him. And what I have been just kicking around in my head here in the early couple of days before I really get into this game is stopping all the other 10 guys on the Bucs offense and not worrying so much about Brady. Because if you get too caught up in what affects Brady and let's confuse Brady and let's pressure Brady and all this kind of stuff, I don't think that's going to work. No. But if you get caught up in how can we take Mike Evans, Rob Gronkowski, and Chris Godwin away from Tom Brady and make him beat us throwing to Leonard Fournette and some of these secondary options, then maybe you have a better chance in that game. So in my mind, the mantra for the Patriots coaching staff this week with the game plan should be, how do we shut down Brady's weapons and not necessarily worry about rattling Tom, right? Because it's not going to work most likely. No. So let's focus on, let's get a plan in place for Mike Evans. Let's have a plan in place for Chris Godwin. Let's have a plan in place for Rob Gronkowski. And let's take away the weapons, because a quarterback is only as good as his open receivers, right? And if there's nobody open, and Brady, I don't care how good. I mean, look at 2019, right? I mean, the Patriots had Tom Brady, who was clearly still very, very good, but it didn't matter because their weapons around him sucked. Yeah. So if you can stop the system and stop the offense around Tom Brady, then I think you might be able to actually keep this a game. Because I do think the Patriots defense has the personnel to come up with some sort of legitimate game plan against Brady. Now, the offense we have to work on ourselves, right? They're a work in progress, and they have to figure out how to be better themselves. The Bucs secondary is not very good so far this year. They are vulnerable in the back end if you can block it up, right? And that's the biggest problem the Patriots have been having. And we know Todd Bowles can spin the pressure with the best of them, right? He'll bring all sorts of blitzes and things from all sorts of different directions against a rookie quarterback. So that's to me spells a recipe for disaster. But at the same time, like I said, the defense, I think, can keep them in the game, similarly to what they did against New Orleans, right? Where the game was at least in shouting distance because the defense wasn't getting blown out.
I mean, I said this last week on the NFL preview show that I didn't think that Tampa Bay was looking as good as people thought they were looking, and
Yeah.
the evidence was that they were being outgained in the first 2 games. Now they've been outgained. I mean, in the first 3 games. So I haven't even looked at the total yardage, to be honest with you, but I can't imagine that they outgained the Rams. So that's something where you either say, all right, well, are they just turning it on and turning it off? That kind of feeling. And now that they've lost that first game, that shows they're not invincible. They'll wake up. And we know still how talented they are, though. And I don't think it's a surprise that they've played this way, that it's almost like we'll play when we have to play. We're Super Bowl champs now. Everybody's returned. And now we've got the big game on Sunday Night Football. We're going to rally around our leader. You know, my gut tells me, as much as I picked the Rams last week, at Tampa Bay in this situation, look, Trent Brown comes back, I feel a lot better about any potential chance that the Patriots have. Without Trent Brown, I give the Patriots basically no chance. I just don't. I mean, they almost have to play a pretty perfect game, and I just don't see them doing that without their best players.
No, and the only way that the Patriots have a chance in this game, I would say, is if early on, and Brady's not necessarily one to fall victim to this, but if he has any kind of nerves, right? If he has any kind of butterflies, nerves, if it feels weird to him to be playing as an opponent in that stadium, you know, this is different in a lot of ways than other guys returning because he was here for so long. It's not just about the success, but it's about the length and time that he played here. So now he's going to arrive at this stadium. He's going to walk into the visitors' locker room, right? He's going to walk through different parts of the tunnels down behind, inside Gillette Stadium. He's going to stand on a different sideline, and it's all going to just feel backwards to him. And nothing that he's gone through in the last year and a half in Tampa Bay is like this, right? He's not experienced anything like it. So there could be a part of him. I'm not saying it's going to last the entire game, but there could be a part of him in the first quarter that's a little bit
possible.
Shaky,
and you got to take advantage of that and make sure you come out of the first quarter with some sort of lead. So when he does come back to earth, if that happens, then maybe you're in a game.
Yeah, it reminds me the first time the Patriots played the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. It was in the 2018 season, and they shut him out in the first half. And Belichick just threw a bunch of different disguise looks and pressures and all sorts of crazy stuff at Mahomes, and he looked rattled. Then he came out in the second half, and they scored 31 points in the second half.
Remember that game?
Right?
Yes.
So he calmed down, he gathered himself, and he went and did Patrick Mahomes things. That's the hope that the Patriots have to have, is that they can keep Brady maybe a little bit rattled, maybe a little bit dusty in there for him at times and emotional, right? The coming back here and almost in a way kind of hype that up a little bit. I think this week would help. Oh, well, it'd be great to have Tom back. Like everybody's going to be so happy to have Tom back, right? And you almost have to play that sort of mind gamesmanship with it a little bit, where you kind of make this. We don't think it's that big of a deal. I'm saying the Patriots are saying this, right? We don't think it's that big of a deal that he's coming back, but let's make Tom think it's a big deal that he's coming back. And maybe you put some of that pressure on him.
Well, weather, I know it's 5 games out, but any word on what the weather might be like?
It's probably going to be a relatively calm night, as based off the forecast right now.
Warm enough.
Yeah, like 50, high 50s.
Oh, that's perfect, really.
50s. Yeah. The one thing that always stands out about Gillette Stadium. So I don't know if you've ever been to Gillette Stadium, but Gillette's a horseshoe. So there's an open end to the stadium. There's an open end with a lighthouse and all that kind of stuff. And Brady will obviously know a lot about the wind and everything because he's Brady. But that's definitely something that I noticed last week with New Orleans. They kicked into the open end of the stadium on a 52-yard kick, and Rosas came nowhere close, right?
Yes.
He shanked it completely, trying to kick it into the wind and into that open end of the stadium. So those are things that I always look at for opponents that are out of conference, right? Teams that are not playing here often, that only come here every 8 years or so. Bruce Arians, I don't even remember the last time that he played a game in Gillette Stadium, but it's a different kind of wind. And it's always, I mean, speaking as somebody that does stand-ups out there at Gillette every single week, it is always windy. Always. So if you're Bruce Arians, you better be taking some pointers from Tom Brady
Yeah, I'm
about
sure he will be.
we need to go against the wind here and we can't kick into the wind there and, things like that.
What do you feel? What's your gut tell you on a Tuesday?
My gut tells me that this game is going to unfortunately be a massacre that the Patriots are not going to want to be a part of. And all we're going to do is lament about how that should have been the Patriots with Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski and everything that everybody's been doing for the last year plus, right, since the start of last season. Look, I think the Bucs are more vulnerable this year than maybe they were last year in some respects, and the defensive secondary isn't as good, and they have some holes back there. But ultimately, I just don't see how Mac Jones is going to be able to put up enough points to hang with Brady.
I agree.
And they're really going to have to come out. Belichick's going to have one of those Hall of Fame level game plans, right, on defense, where he's got a couple that are in the Hall of Fame. The Bills Giants Super Bowl with Thurman Thomas and back in the day, that's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The Rams game plan against the Greatest Show on Turf is in the Hall of Fame, and the second Rams game plan against Jared Goff and Sean McVay is also in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Yep. So he's got 3 game plans that are in there. So maybe he can come up with something else.
That's what it's going to take, more than likely.
Yeah.
And that's why, as a guy that kind of does go with the percentages, I'm probably going to go pretty strongly with Tampa Bay this week, because the percentages tell you that chances are that's not going to happen. And we'll see, though. Hey, it's why they play the games. And like you said, it's going to be an emotional time for Tom. It'll be interesting to see exactly how he handles it. How emotional he can get in games. How emotional will he get? Because I think sometimes players forget. I don't know. I think they forget that I know what they're doing when they want to stick it back to the owner. They want to stick it back to the coach. But what they forget sometimes is when you do those demonstrations, you're really sticking it to the fans.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that really were behind you the whole time. It's like when Robbie Anderson scored the touchdowns against the Jets and did the little Jet thing. I'm like, why are you doing that for? You're basically telling Jet fans to go, it's like they loved you. Why are you doing that for?
As much as I agree with you 110%, I actually think what I'm afraid of, and I will be disappointed, and this is the fan in me talking, right? I will be really disappointed in that Gillette Stadium crowd if it goes the way that I'm anticipating it might go. And
like a love fest?
A love fest. An absolute love fest. And
like when he scores a touchdown, they're going to cheer.
I think there will be cheers. Absolutely. I don't think it will be the entire stadium that will be cheering, but I think when Brady scored, because there are a lot of people, and I'm not trying to point any fingers at people in my industry, in the sports media industry, but a lot of this is driven by people in sports media here in Boston, especially on the local radio stations, that have picked Tom. They have sided. This is like, Julian Edelman compared it to 2 parents getting divorced, right? Like, you go to the family barbecue and the mother and the father have to be together and to cooperate because it's the kid's birthday, right? Like, that's like what he compared it to. I thought it was a great comparison, as much as I don't laugh at divorce. Like, I thought it was a great comparison. And this is a little bit of that situation. The mantra that the radio personalities are pushing here are you Tom or are you team? Right? Are you with Brady or are you with Belichick and the Patriots? Is the logo more important to you or is the player more important to you? And a lot of people here in New England have sided with Tom Brady. A lot of people. So I fully anticipate the whole stadium to be 12 jerseys. Like I fully anticipate everybody to bring out the Brady jerseys. I fully anticipate there to be loud cheers for Brady. And I think that if the Bucs are hanging it on the Patriots and Brady's playing out of his mind, I think that a lot of people in the stands will be happy about it. I really do.
And is that because, and I know it's been a while since we talked about it, but is that because when they decided to leave, the fan base blamed ownership? They blamed Belichick.
They blame Belichick, and I think what a lot of fans, I think it's twofold. One, they see what Tom Brady has done in Tampa, and they're like, what were you smoking? Nobody else was going to be better than this guy for the next couple of years. Sure. So from just a pure football personnel decision, how did you think that anything besides Tom Brady was the answer, right? And then secondly to that, I think there's a large sect of the fan base that feels that they were deprived of the last couple of years of Tom Brady's career.
That hurts. It does.
And they felt like not on he should have finished as a Patriot, right? He should have ended his career and retired a Patriot. But B, they could have won a couple of more Super Bowls if they kept him here, right? If they keep Brady here, they're not going to have all the money that they had this past offseason, but they'll have a chunk of change that they could have gone out and still added a few of these pieces. Yeah. And maybe you recreate it one or two more times. And he went down to Tampa and he recreated it once there. So I think a lot of people are saying we left Banner 7, we left Banner, maybe even Banner 8, we left it behind because we let this guy walk out the door. So I think that people feel deprived. I think people feel anger towards Belichick that they weren't able to work this out. And the spin from the Patriots side of it and from Belichick's side is that Tom Brady was a free agent. He had a decision to make of which team he wanted to go to. He was an unrestricted free agent. So they're trying to pin the decision on Brady.
All right, well, forget the spin. What know what's going on there. Why do you think, was this an ego thing for Belichick completely? Or was it, okay, I kind of understand where he's coming from?
So I think it's a couple of things. First of all, in 2019, during training camp, the Patriots offered Tom Brady a 2-year, $53 million contract extension that was going to keep him signed with the Patriots through this season, this 2021 season. And Brady turned it down. And at the time, the argument for Brady for turning it down was that it wasn't enough money, right? He wanted more money.
What the hell does he need more money for?
Right. So I guess it was a conversation of not feeling appreciated by Bill Belichick, right? He wanted to feel the love from Bill. So I don't necessarily think it was dollars and cents, but it was just commitment and love, right, from the head coach that he wasn't feeling. So Brady, when he declined that contract and set himself up to be a free agent at the end after the 2019 season, he was gone. The decision had been made already that he was leaving the Patriots at the end of the year. The Patriots then, Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick went to Tom Brady's house in Brookline a couple of days before free agency started and tried to hash it out. They tried. They sat down. They tried to have a mea culpa, meeting of the minds and say, let's not let it go this direction. That was kind of Robert Kraft's pitch, was let's not end this unbelievable run of success like this. Like, let's not do this to each other. And Brady just, I truly believe that Brady was just ready to move on. And
that's what I believe. I don't think it's fair to just point the finger at Belichick and Kraft and say it's all their fault.
No, and I think that Brady looked at the roster here in New England.
Yes.
And he looked at the cap space and he looked at the draft capital. And then he looked down at Tampa and he said, geez, I could be throwing to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I can bring my family down to Southern Florida and live on the beach all year round instead of dealing with New England winters. It's almost like for Brady himself, he's obviously nowhere close to retired, but it's almost like he kind of is in both doors in a way, right? Because his family is enjoying what they probably envision his retirement life to look like, and he still gets to play football. So I think in a lot of ways, he just saw that he thought the grass was greener elsewhere, and he saw the Patriots with the writing on the wall. Gronkowski had retired and was not going to play. If you want to look for bad blood, I would actually say it's more with Gronkowski and Belichick than Brady and Belichick. And I think Brady saw the writing on the wall that Gronkowski had retired and was not coming back. Julian Edelman was slowing down and was getting banged up with injuries and was probably nearing retirement. N'Keal Harry was a total bust of a first-round pick. They had they had no real cap flexibility, and they had no real high draft picks. So where was the help going to come from?
Last year would have been a disaster again, just like 19.
Right. And that, I think, is really what was the beginning of the end for Brady. Was just it doesn't have to be this hard just so I don't hurt people's feelings, right? Like it ultimately was a decision of, do I stay in New England to avoid alienating my fans and hurting everybody's feelings in the place that I love, or do I go to Tampa Bay where life is just going to be a lot easier on and off the football field?
And I think that's why a majority of fans, I don't think they think through this the way we do. No, it's not their business. They're fans.
Because everybody, and this again, I would point fingers a little bit at the media here in Boston for it as well. Everybody is under the impression that Bill Belichick and Tom Brady hate each other's guts, and there was some big blowout fight that between the two guys, and it wasn't necessarily that. It just, the whole thing just kind of got stale. Right. The whole thing kind of got stale, and it became work for Tom Brady. It didn't become fun because they just had run its course. It just had run its course. And I don't think that that's a fair enough assessment of the situation for fans, because they want to dramatize it and make it into a Hollywood movie. Yeah. And that's really not what it was. It just had run its course, and the relationship between the two guys wasn't where it needed to be. And if Gronk was still in his peak, and Edelman was still in his peak, and those guys were still on the roster, and N'Keal Harry was a good draft pick, like none of this would have happened. So a lot of it was football as well.
Yeah. All right, Evan. So we'll see how the story unfolds. The TV show of the week.
Yeah, it really does feel like a movie that's being created here by everybody more than a football game, which I mean, I get, that's the job, right? That's what we're supposed to do.
Well, we'll see how it goes. Usually these big stories don't ever live up to it. And I think we both agree that's probably what's going to happen. It's probably not going to be as dramatic a game as we're kind of hoping, but you never know. So we'll talk about that next week. Meanwhile, you're going to talk more about that on Patriots Press Pass, correct?
Yes, YouTube Patriots Press Pass. Patriots beat twice this week, and I'm sure we will go very, very long and deep into this whole thing with Tom Brady. We try not to get too much into the drama side of it. We try to stick more to X's and O's on Pat's beat. But we'll still talk about Brady and Belichick. It's the elephant in the room, so you really can't ignore it.
Thanks, Evan. Great job as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good.